Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Shineman. I am the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here at UUCY, and it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. The story I have to share with you is called Sunnyside Mary. Now, you see, not far from here, in a medium-sized town, there was a middle school. But this middle school was a little bit unique. There were two really unique things about it. Instead of an auditorium, they had a huge courtyard. And in the center of this courtyard was this big, huge pool with fountains in it. And in the middle of that pool was this massive stage. It was connected to one side of the courtyard by a bridge. And it was a really amazing place to see concerts, except there was one problem. People who sat in the sunny side, they could see the stage and the performers perfectly. But those who sat on the shady side, where it was often a little bit cool, they looked at the backs of the performers. Now, the second thing that was unique about this town is that there were people who came from the north side and the south side. And when they came to these concerts and these events in this courtyard, it just so happened that the north side kids sat on the sunny side in the warmth, viewing the concert, and the south side kids, they sat in the shady side, looking at the backs of the performers. No one really quite knew where the rule came from. The kids, the north siders, they said, well, this is the principal's rule, and we are just following what the principal said. But if you ask the principal said, well, this is how the kids want it. This is what they've decided. Some of the teachers said, well, the north side kids, they behave better, so they get some rewards. While some other teachers did say, well, we don't really think it's fair, but none of them actually did anything to change it. Until the day that Mary waded in the water. Now, you see, Mary had a favorite band, and the Zoot Suit Tutors were coming to perform a concert in that courtyard. She had her t-shirt ready. She'd been listening to their CDs for weeks. This was her favorite band, and she couldn't stand the idea of watching the concert staring at the Zoot Suit Tutors' backs. So what did she do? Mary got there early that day, and she sat on the sunny side, basking in the glory. She had a perfect view of the stage. But then other kids started arriving. And soon there were a bunch of north side kids gathering on the sunny side of the courtyard, and they started yelling at Mary. What are you doing, south sider? Get out of here. But Mary just pretended not to hear them and just kept enjoying where she was sitting. They kept yelling and yelling and yelling, and finally, the north siders did what they always do when any south sider tried to come on to the north side of the lawn, the sunny side. They picked Mary up and they threw her into the fountain. Now, usually, this act alone was enough to stop any south sider from trying to get to the sunny side of the courtyard. But this was Mary's favorite band. She wasn't going to be thrown in the fountain and then just watch from the shady side, staring at the Zoot Suit Tutors' backs. So she got out of the fountain. She went back to the sunny side. What do you think happened? If you guessed that the north siders picked her up and threw her right back in the fountain, you would be correct. Now, Mary was angry. As I'm sure many of you would be, the same thing happened to you. She was soaked, she was a little bit cold, and she started to walk up out of the fountain to go back to the north side, to the sunny side, and she saw the north side kids come back, and she knew that they were just going to throw her back into the fountain anyway, so she stepped back into the fountain. She started sloshing around in the fountain, trying to figure out what to do. And as she was sloshing through the water, she was reminded of a song that her grandma used to sing all the time. Wade in the water, children, wade. in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. And as she's sloshing around, she starts smiling and giggling and being filled with just the most immense joy. The water was good enough for God, it was good enough for Mary. So she starts moving around in the water, listening to the Zoot Suit Tutors. And a funny thing happened. All of the people, all the Southsiders on the shady side of that courtyard, they got up and they joined Mary in the fountain. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the story, I told you that the stage was right in the middle of that fountain. So now, all of the Southsiders were perfectly placed, right in perfect view of the Zoot Suit Tutors. They could see them perfectly. They were now in front. And of course, the Northsiders, they did not like this. So they had to go. They couldn't just throw people into the fountain because all the Southsiders were already in the fountain. So they had to go and be in the fountain. And they pushed their way and they got to the front. So now they were in front. And they had the perfect view of the Zoot Suit Tutors. But then Mary and all her Southsiders, they got up. They walked out of the fountain to the north side, to the sunny side of the courtyard. They dried off and they enjoyed the concert. And all the Northsiders were stuck in the fountain and they didn't know what to do. Because they couldn't pick up every single Southsider and throw them into the fountain. They'd already been there and it didn't bother them, and they were dumbfounded. They didn't know what to do. And from that day forward, things changed. Any child sat wherever they wanted to sit. The rule no longer seemed applicable. And it all started when Mary took her joy and used it as a form of resistance. She said, "You're going to do this to me? Okay, well, I am going to laugh and smile and giggle and just be filled with so much joy." And they didn't know what to do with that. And because of that joy from that day forward, Mary was known as Sunnyside Mary. Blessed be. Amen.
When a star is born, they possess a gift or two. One of them is this: they have the power to make a wish come true. When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, no request is too extreme. When you wish upon a star as dreamers do, fate is kind. She brings to those who love the sweet fulfillment of their secret longing. Like a bolt out of the blue, fate steps in and sees it through. When your wish upon a star, your dreams come true.
Our reading today is an excerpt from Ross Gay's essay, Transplanting. Ross Gay is a poet, gardener, and professor. This essay is found in his collection, The Book of Delights. Today, I have smuggled 3 fig cuttings onto a flight from Philadelphia to Detroit. Truth be told, no smuggling has occurred, given as I was carrying the things open and notorious, their roots tucked into some moist compost in a plastic bag. But smuggling makes it sound more thrilling than what it appears, carrying a few sticks in a bag, and therefore more like what it is, carrying living creatures for replanting about 700 miles away, which you might have already gone there, given as I've told you already they're figs, is another way of saying I'm carrying joy around in my bag. This is one of those delights that keeps piling up, as the fig tree I took these cuttings from in my partner's mother's backyard was itself made of a cutting from a grove of figs where my friend's family lived. Yesterday, when I dug up a few of her mother's figs, I used a shovel and hacked at the roots, sending soothing mind beams to the tree as I did so. After I got a few well-rooted cuttings, I took them to the bucket near the house, filled it up, dropped them in, showered, and dressed for the funeral of a beloved 20-year-old kid named Rachel, who fell to her death a few nights ago. When we were standing in the back corner of the funeral home during the eulogies, my partner caught sight of a silver gleam on a gray carpet. When the eulogy was over, she picked it up, a single elephant earring. Elephants were Rachel's favorite animal. She adored them. When we got home, I grabbed the bucket, trimmed the cuttings into sticks, potted them in the plastic bag, and set them on the counter, where they sat like promises. Little converters, little dreamers of coming back into bloom, and how we might carry that with us wherever we go.
Today is the 3rd Sunday of Advent in the Christian liturgical calendar. And this was always one of my favorite Sundays when I was a little kid going to Catholic Mass with my family. I loved it for one simple reason. On that day, the priest wore pink. But I often wondered, well, how come we only wear pink on one day of the year? In the oldest traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, the 3rd Sunday of Advent is called Gaudete Sunday, named after the very first words of the Mass for this day in Latin, Gaudete in Domino semper, rejoice in the Lord always. Gaudete Sunday means it is a day of rejoicing, for the holy day of Christmas draws near, and also apparently that it's a-okay to wear pink, which I'm not doing. And I had many serious theological discussions as a child with my father about why we didn't get the super excited Sunday one Sunday before Christmas, since that was even closer. And for that matter, why didn't we wear pink for the whole month? It's all getting ready, right? I never really received an adequate answer to this question, so obviously I had to leave the church. No, not really, but kind of. Also, yes. Why did outright joy feel constrained to me in the faith of my youth? Was there truly only one Sunday devoted to it fully? That is a vast theological oversimplification, but it points to a larger truth. There is such freedom and excitement in centering our worship around joy. It felt too rare to me in the faith of my youth, and I don't want it to feel rare in this, my chosen faith. I want us to revel in the beauty of the joy we may each feel and struggle to feel as we pursue our spiritual paths. I want us to come to our faith community again and again, not just when we feel that joy is in short supply, but also when we are simply filled with it. If we are filled to overflowing, might our joy not be there for someone else whose cup is not full? We've already said it. Each week in this community, we share our matters of the heart. The human heart carries so many things. We honor our human complexity when we declare the worth of both our joys and our sorrows. In our reading today, Ross Gay, one of my very favorite poets, who often lists Gardner first amongst his accomplishments, although he is a prize-winning poet, talks about both the transplantation of fig tree cuttings and the death of a 20-year-old woman. It's a complicated reading to consider. Here is the reality. Transplanting those fig trees taken from his partner's mother's yard, and before that from his friend's family's yard, did happen on the same day as the young woman's funeral. And for him to write truthfully about those tiny new fig trees meant the story must include the funeral. Life doesn't sort itself out into easy pieces, where the happy things happen here and the sad things happen there, and never the twain shall meet. The twain shall almost always meet in the messy and expansive reality that is our daily life. The happy and the sad and more besides, all those things we carry, all mixed up with one another in our hearts. At the end of today's reading, after Gay is returned from the funeral with his partner, he moves his focus from the small elephant earring found there. Rachel adored them. Right back to the fig trees he hopes to transplant. When we got home, I grabbed the bucket, trimmed the cuttings into sticks, potted them in the plastic bag, and set them on the counter, where they sat like promises. Little converters, little dreamers of coming back into bloom, and how we might carry that with us wherever we go. Little promises, little converters, little dreamers of coming back into bloom, and how we might carry that with us wherever we go. There are no guarantees that these cuttings will flower and eventually grow new figs, although that tree itself is an affirmation that this process has worked before. Just as there were no guarantees that a beloved 20-year-old would not die in a sad accident. But the tiny sticks in their comfortable compost held a promise and a dream of potential. At the very start of the reading, Gay notes that by saying he's carrying figs, it is another way of saying I'm carrying joy around in my bag. Those trees may grow and bloom and bear delicious, sweet fruit, no matter how much sorrow was in his heart at the time the cuttings were taken. The true story of joy is complicated. At this time of year especially, I feel like we're often told a simpler story about joy. Or maybe I should say joy in giant glitter-bedazzled letters, perhaps flanked by doves of peace or honking geese, festooned in holiday decorations by the score. I don't know about you, but the forced festiveness of this time of year can be wearing on me. How are you asking me to be all twinkle lights and snowflakes while the world is on fire? Why does it feel like there's no option but joy at this time of year, even when it can feel hard to access? If I'm not joyful, what will people think? Is something wrong with me? No. First and foremost, if I say nothing else that remains with you today, there is nothing wrong with you if it is challenging to find joy at this time of year or ever. In a world full of pain and suffering, ignorance and injustice, it can, of course, be challenging to access joy. To me, that is part of the value of the hand-in-handedness of the joy and grief in our reading today. Because sometimes when we do feel deep and profound joy, even with the pandemic, the climate crisis, expanding economic disparities, and the toxic combination of white supremacy and patriarchy that still besets us, sometimes when we do feel a surge of joy, that can feel wrong. It is not wrong for it to be challenging to access joy. And it is not wrong for you to celebrate and revel in joy even in hard times, especially in hard times. In fact, joy is necessary. Joy is vital not just to thriving, but to surviving. The title I picked for this service is Joy is an Act of Resistance. And we heard a great story from Matt earlier about that exact thing. And that line comes from a poem by Toy Derricott, and it has become a chorus for Black feminism and for those engaging in justice work in general. Rather than sharing that poem, it's part of a longer cycle, and it's really difficult to share that quote in a fruitful way without a context of a much larger work. I'd like to share with you something that this poem inspired. The best-selling author, public speaker, and producer, Austin Channing Brown, has written beautifully about what Toy Derricott has awoken within her. These are her words. Black girls and Black women alike have our joy misconstrued as disrespectful, arrogant, or perpetually inappropriate. Our joy is suspicious. And what right do we have to joy when we have so much work to do? Miss Derricott, with the wonder that only poetry can unearth, gives an answer. We aren't just pursuing racial justice when we are organizing or voting or protesting or speech making or volunteering or working. We are also pursuing justice when we indulge in joy. This was my entrance into joy, and I am so grateful for Ms. Derricott opening the door through the lens of resistance so that I don't work myself to death, believing that is the only way to speak truth to power. Her words gave me permission to indulge. And now I want more, not only as a part of the resistance, but because I am human. And my human dignity demands that I, too, experience unadulterated joy. Again, these are Austin Channing Brown's words. I am human, and my human dignity demands that I, too, experience unadulterated joy. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism states we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And whatever body you occupy, whether it has been subject to intersecting systems of oppression or whether it has been granted overwhelming privilege, it is worthy. You are worthy. And you deserve the entire range of human experience, all of it, all the complicated things we carry in our hearts. Of course, Austin Channing Brown didn't write that human dignity demands that she experience unadulterated joy at all times. Not only is that inaccessible, but it would be unsustainable. Too much joy, too much grief, too much of any big emotion. It's exhausting. But the truth from our reading, from what we've been examining, is we are larger than we realize. Our hearts, minds, and spirits can hold a vast complexity of emotions and ideas. When we are given messages that our joy is unwelcome, when a Black child playing becomes a suspect, when a woman walking alone becomes a target, when a loving queer couple have hate speech directed at them, it diminishes our sense of self and personhood. Your joy is too large for the cultural narrative. your joy is small and precarious. Whatever form your joy takes, recognize it, welcome it. And when you see joy being denied to another, understand that that is a denial of that person's very humanness. Denying access to joy is injustice. So the work of joy, experiencing it, sharing it, mourning its lack, cultivating it in the self and others is justice work. What would a just world even look like if it were not joyful? Even a tiny seed or a little stick of joy can grow in the soil of the human heart. Each one is a little promise, a little converter, a little dreamer of coming back into bloom. Each may be carried with us wherever we go. And when we cultivate our own joy enough for it to thrive, we can take cuttings, we can propagate the joy throughout the world. That is the radical saving power of joy at the heart both of this season and our lives. In honor of the joy and interconnectedness of this season and of all of our lives, please feel free to join in along at home as we hear our hymn, number 238, Within the Shining of a Star.
At this time in our service each week, we invite you into generosity. This congregation relies on the time, the talent, and the treasure of its members and friends in order to maintain our community, to grow our capacity, and to thrive both now and in the years to come. It is the practice of this congregation to share each week's offering with an organization serving our community that upholds our values. We use Share the Plate to honor our commitment to service to our local community through these generous donations to local partners. December's Share the Plate recipient is Martin Library. Located at the corner of Market and Queen Streets since 1935, Martin Library is a city landmark and has 3 levels of collection, programming, and gathering spaces. Here you can find the largest collection of books in York County, research expertise, over 70 computers, and learning experiences for all ages. Now more than ever, our library needs your support to ensure these resources continue to be accessible and the programs you love continue to run. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We extinguish this chalice here so that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again.
Come once again to the conclusion of our Sunday worship, ready to begin our service for the week ahead. Let the joy that is within your hearts blossom. If you find yourself welling up, share. If all you can cling to is a tiny stick, treasure it, hold it. Propagate joy and radical hospitality and love in the world. So may it be.
Furrows, be glad the earth is bare. One more seed is planted there. Give up your strength, the seed to nourish that in course the flower may flourish. People look east and sing to